Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Coffee with Sales Engineers. I am so excited to have our guest, Michael Jackson, on the call with an amazing journey and story about sales engineering. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience here, and then we'll dive into some of the questions.
Okay, yeah, and I bet there's probably a whole lot of people out there that said, Sachin, you got an interview with Michael Jackson? And the first thing was like, did he do a seance?
You're a hologram,
then,
man.
Yeah, and the second part is like, when you see the video, you're like, oh, okay, that's not the other one there. But yeah, definitely glad to be part of this, sharing some coffee and really chopping up, sharing some information, sharing some stories from the front line. Yeah, as you mentioned before, Michael Jackson, team members sometimes will call me MJ just to avoid the confusion. Really been in this particular field industry for quite a long time, even before when we maybe had the role of sales engineer or solution consultant. Yeah. Back then, you might have been the engineer that the sales team could bring in front of people. And so been doing it for quite a while, and and definitely enjoy everything.
I'm sure since you are in front of prospects all the time, is MJ like a nice icebreaker? Does the joke always start with
it always is, because like I said, in our field, particularly if you're in front of a customer or even over a camera, there's always going to be that little bit of smile, a little bit of that. So it definitely is a nice icebreaker, and you're guaranteed that people will remember your name.
One of my best sales reps, MJ, was this guy named Smoky Mountain. His first name was Smoky and his last name was Mountain. He would tell this joke about how his parents had a sense of humor because he's got a sister whose name is Candy, and he's got a brother whose name is, I'm forgetting, something mountain related. So it was like all the three mountains. Yeah. You're right. People always remembered him, right? He didn't have to, the name was memorable, but so exciting. And it's great to be in a prospect facing role where you get to have those icebreakers. I want to get into your journey. You mentioned, and you're spot on, existed for longer than any of us can imagine. It just wasn't called sales engineer, solution consultant, solutions engineer. And we're still going through an evolution, right? Every company has a different title for it, different name for it, and different variation of what the SCs do. Sometimes it's pre-sales only, sometimes it's pre and post-sales. Our profession will continue to evolve. Tell me, MJ, is that okay if I call you MJ or Michael?
Yeah, you sure can. Yeah.
You said your coworkers call you MJ, so I'll call you MJ. Tell me, MJ, when you were graduating or studying, did you ever imagine that you would end up having a successful career in this unique combination of role where you get to apply your technical expertise along with your business acumen? How did you discover what this role is?
I think like maybe a lot of us, it might have been by accident or just maybe, again, because we're coming out of college, went to school for computer science, and you knew you were going to be a software developer. Conversely, you might have been on the business side and you might have been in sales, but there wasn't really that going between. So, and maybe the closest thing may have been like in professional services, they had the consulting companies and things like that, where then you might have been called a consultant, and then who knows what you would do. Really early on in my career, and I describe with no offense to the software engineers, they tend to be a little more solitary. They're not the ones that like to get out in front, really working in small areas, dark rooms.
I was just going to say, lights got to be off, right?
Going back, I'll probably age myself a little from the .com days and everything like that, when things were booming, the next new thing, everything was coming out. There existed a paradigm shift where, from where you were selling a single solitary product where it solved a certain need, and the sales team had to understand how to sell the product. Mm-hmm. As you kind of transition to more technology, we start talking about a larger ecosystem. This begins some conversations of a more technical nature, which the salespeople wanted to avoid, like the flu. Mm-hmm. So what would end up happening is they would try to pick some engineer that they, number one, could put in a room that would, feel somewhat comfortable and talk somewhat legibly. Mm-hmm. And number two, not blow the deal. Right. Early on, my nature is a little bit more outgoing. I say maybe that's a detriment. Maybe I wasn't the best programmer, but I was very, as far as analytical thinking and figuring out how to get things done, it was a natural fit where the salesperson would be like, is Michael available? I have a customer on the call that I need to just in case they stump me with something, just help me answer that. That really gave birth as far as like the role in terms of what I did. It wasn't really until about 8 years in, and we brought in a defense company. We brought in a new manager, and he's walking through what I did, because for a while they were like, okay, you're this person. Hey, why don't you just go out and sell software? And of course, I was, oh gosh, that means I got to do quota or anything like that. So I sat down and talked with him, and he mentioned you're like a sales engineer. And I was like, yeah, I am.
Yeah, put you in sales.
Yeah, so that's where, and again, by then this is 2009, 2010, where it was starting to pick up a little bit more. So that's really where I adapted. And again, this is a role where I felt extremely comfortable with, and have been doing ever since then. To your point, I wish they should have college courses on whether if you want to call it
especially in computer science, right? Like
yeah.
in computer science, I'm sure you can look at any computer science class and cohort and filter out at least 10-15% of that student body to say you are as smart as the others, but you're probably going to be bored writing code. You need to be in front of prospects, solving problems, coming up with solutions, and then pass it on to somebody else to actually develop it. The good news is more universities now are incorporating sales engineering into their curriculum. We still don't have an undergrad in sales engineering. That will eventually happen, I think, but for now, I'll take that. You did start your career, I think you mentioned professional services, integration, consulting. So at these companies is what you're describing, where you weren't necessarily part of sales, but you were in a very technical role, but the sales team kept pulling you into sales conversations or customer conversations, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, that's really how that went in. At some point, somebody was probably smart enough to realize that we're actually crucial to the sales cycle.
Sales.
And it makes sense rather than bringing somebody just totally cold coming in. There's always the flip side is if you bring somebody in cold, you don't have an understanding of any of the previous conversations. You don't have an understanding of the customer, the company that you want to work with. So there's always that risk. They may answer some questions, but it may not be, it may be totally out of context of any conversation that you had prior. Or again, this is going back to skill sets. We are in a unique position as far as being able to not only understand technical, analytical things, but the ability to effectively convey those ideas. The sales team would generally say, okay, this person is the person I want to choose. And then, it might make sense to either brief them prior or, hey, we're going out to lunch. Why don't you go to lunch? We'll go with the customer.
Right.
Sit down, chop it up. So that's really been the evolution in terms of where we started. And I think since then, what's really grown, and also recognition in terms of we are part of that revenue stream. So in terms of compensation wise and things like that, and I know those vary from company to company, but really being involved on that pre-sale side. The great thing about this job, as you mentioned before, is it could take on several different layers. You mentioned before too, in terms of the pre-sale cycle, but again, there could be that post-sale cycle. One things that I always tell, especially like younger individuals that I may try to mentor as far as like the high schools and colleges, is say there's also that aspect where you can influence product because you are out there in front of the customer. You are listening and hearing the feedback on this. This is, I'd say that this is one of the few positions where you can touch all areas of the business. You have an understanding of the product, of existing product, your competitors, the customer needs. You have a voice in terms of the product development, in terms of what are new features that are coming out. And then companies will vary in terms of doing pre-support, post-support. I always try to at least have a little bit from the post-support in two ways. One, to help do that exchange of information about. I want information dealing with the account rep and understanding of the customer. And it's only right that you do the same thing to the post-sales team, services team that maybe are going to implement the solution. There's always that piece. And there's always, again, being able to, what I call in sales term, land and expand. So maybe
Yes.
you had a smaller opportunity that you're working, and there could be new opportunities based on the products that your company's rolling out or based on the company's needs, and having an understanding that you're from a post sale. How are things going with the customer? Is the customer
Right.
happy? The worst thing you want to do is try to talk about your latest and greatest in technology, and they're having issues over at customer support.
Right.
They're mad at you and everything like that. Our role involves so many different pieces, and
Yeah.
and that's the great thing about our role. It's still constantly evolving.
You've already answered my second question, which is what keeps you going? It is not your first time being a sales engineer. You've been a sales engineer at different companies. Do you feel you found your calling? Do you feel this is a profession you want to continue to grow in? What is it about this profession? It sounds like it's never boring. You're always working on different projects. You talked about how it is one of the unique professions in a position to influence the product roadmap and be directly responsible for companies' revenue. What are some other things about being an SC that keeps you inspired?
Yeah, I would say if you ever get bored in an SC job, it's time to find a new company. The job itself is never going to be boring. The software company or whatever that you're doing may become boring. But number one, again, because technology, we see the evolution of technology. From the time I graduated, we're just, hey, object-oriented code, program is great, everything like that. And then we phase into more cloud computing. We talk about RPA was a thing for a while. Now we got all the stuff with the AI. The key things that there's a lot of emerging technologies out there. So as SCs, our role is to be in the forefront of some of that information. We don't have to be masters of everything and just be, I am just the guru of that, but being able to have a good understanding. So you're constantly in a state of learning. It's always like you're always learning new things. The other thing too is really unique is that because we are involved with that sales cycle, you get to see early on working with the customer, doing all the problem solving, the things that you developed, whether if you were a programmer, if you were a project manager, you're able to do that, but you're able to see that from the ground up and then see that success in terms of the company, in terms of revenue. If you have companies that ring the bells,
It's
everybody's happy.
immediate gratification, right? Like you were part of a deal and
Yeah.
you just closed it, you won it. How many professions get to see that immediate outcome of your effort?
Yeah.
If you're a developer and you're on an 18-month roadmap cycle, it takes some time before your contribution to the code will be realized. Whereas an SC, you can see your impact right away.
And not only from the organization you work with, but the organization that you've solved the problem for. You can see the impacts in terms of that business that you provided some type of value. As a salesperson, you're typically going in as a trusted advisor. You earn that stripe to be able to say that I understand the challenge that you're going through. I think I have some suggestions that help you along the way, and maybe this is how our software, this is how maybe you look at a business. Very few roles where you can have those impacts in terms of at a company level. We speak to a wide variety of audiences, which is totally unique. You might have one conversation with a bunch of architects, solution architects, or they're just like all they want to know are ones and zeros, how I have to put it together,
Right.
what are my pain points over there, and then the next day have a totally different conversation with the executive buying powers. Maybe you're talking to the CEO, you're talking to these people that basically impact your business. So to be able to traverse through those various areas of influence is just totally unique. It's really unique to our position.
Yeah. And I call this one of the superpowers of sales engineering, being a chameleon. You're on one call talking to very deep technical architects, and then you jump off that call. Now you're in front of a CFO and you have to context switch right away. Another area that I want to dig into is that same chameleon superpower comes into play when you're working with multiple account executives, right? So you mentioned selling is a team sport. As an SE, even as an implementation consultant, the sales reps were bringing you in because they knew you added value in the sales cycle. Prospects trusted you. You were the trusted advisor. You knew what you were talking about. And most SEs end up working with multiple AEs. I've yet to find two AEs being identical or similar. They all have same quota, but they all have very different approaches, right? And rightly, right? None of them is like the right approach or the wrong approach. They all achieve their accelerators and in different ways. But here you are with the same personality. How do you shape shift into supporting different AEs with their different personalities?
And the one thing on the head that is going to be common throughout all account reps, no matter what, is the quota. That's
right.
No matter what,
the only thing that unifies them.
Whatever the personalities, the quota is going to be the main thing. So really understanding that first of all, because from there you will get a good understanding in terms of some of the personality sets that you'll run into. Because account reps are quota carriers and responsible for that, there's always going to be a tendency for them to want to assume control, because at the end of the day, I'm being evaluated based on what I bring into the company. Right. So initially coming in with that understanding is always a good thing. Just talking with your account rep, especially the first time coming out, when you're brand new into this field, it's sometimes a scary thing because you don't really know your voice. You try to navigate your way. How do I fit in? How do I make sure I'm providing the impact that I need to help ensure you're delivering the right solution, assisting the account rep to make sure that they're following through, whether if it's successful cycle or what I call fail fast, if it's just obviously cut bait and everything like that. That could be a challenge sometimes. Again, if you're new in the organization, transitioning from another company, brand new experience, you have to understand that culture. The first conversation is just getting to know the account rep, understanding how they've done in the past. Obviously, if they've been hitting President's Club every year, that could be one or two things. One, that they're definitely high volume sellers and they probably do a lot of the research work in terms of identifying buyers, influencers, everything like that. But it also could mean that they may have a large expectation of control. Conversely, if there's somebody that hasn't hit their number in 4 or 5 quarters, that might be somebody that is a little bit more, they're like, hey, my job could be on the edge. They're on the edge. Really understanding the account rep and then just chopping it up. Just say, hey, how do you approach the sales cycle? What are the things that are important to you? And again, one of our superpower skills is listening.
Yeah.
So here's where I think I add value. Some of it's back and forth. The key things that I always try to tell whatever sales rep is, in particular, when we're talking with the customer, there's going to be 2 sets of ears listening. From the account team, he's looking for, again, how do I close the sales cycle? What are the buying indicators? And those are the things that he should be listening for. Conversely, my role is, okay, what are the technical wins? What are the things that we need to understand, address, make sure that the customer feels comfortable. We understand, number one, that we understand the challenges or can identify challenges and then provide solutions for them. So when you're talking to account rep, to say, hey, if we're in this together, we can listen to 2 separate, be in the same room here
in parallel.
In parallel. And we can bring all that stuff together. So again, having those conversations, I like to sometimes go out to lunch with the account reps. And then again, certain account reps, they're going to be unique. I've had some that are very technical oriented where they have a decent understanding. And I've had some that, again, I call them the area where maybe they're not selling so good, where they might just come up and be like, hey, Mike, why don't you go ahead and talk about the product and everything and leave the
see what happens.
Are you going to say anything?
That's right.
There's all different flavors of account rep. So number one, just understanding your account rep and then showing the value that you can add with that. And that's going to change personalities that you may need to shift a little bit. But there are some core tenets that we know that we have, there tend to be more successful outcomes if we're allowed to be a part in certain things or have a certain understanding of certain things that are just, there's going to be consistent. The combination of the two is what makes the most effective relationship between the account rep and the SE.
And it's interesting, when you know that relationship is strong, you feel it. You go into meetings, each other's body language, each other's vibe. When that person is stressed or you're talking too long and you can feel they want you to shorten it, or you're not explaining enough, right? And it's so amazing. All of that comes from mutual respect, that mutual relationship. You're spot on. For any SC to invest the time in understanding, I usually ask questions like, okay, if I'm working with a new, I'll just ask them, think about your best SC you've ever worked with. What are some qualities that come to mind? Now think about the worst SC that you hated working with. What are some qualities that come to mind? The hardest part in being that chameleon is there might be some things that they hated their other SCs do, and you do it all the time. Right now, it's your call to say, do you really want to stick to your script and have that person just adopt to you? Or is it worth you adopting to that person? And it's a balance, but I agree. I think going to lunch, traveling together, right? Because it is a team sport and the prospects can tell, right? You go into a meeting and when there's that synergy, the prospects know that you're unified. I love your 2 ears listening part because what they are saying is they don't want to repeat the same thing for you versus the AE. They want to give their message. They want you both to work together to understand both the business requirements and technical blockers. So I love that. It's a very important relationship. I think as a profession, we don't spend a lot of time talking about it. My last podcast was, we made this joke that AESC relationship is like an arranged marriage because you literally are like assigned. You know, it's like, all right, MJ and John, go work together. So wait, I guess I'm with this person. But no, this has been so amazing, man. I really appreciate you sharing your insight. What an amazing journey you've had and your talking points around how to build relationships, what you enjoy about sales engineering. It's so great to hear. And anybody who's got computer science degree, implementation experience, listen to this podcast. If you've got the qualities that MJ just talked about, you can be a sales engineer too and have a very fulfilling, successful career that is never boring and it's always challenging. It's high visibility. It's high influence. So why wouldn't you want to be a sales engineer? So thank you for sharing your ideas and your thoughts. Really appreciate it.
No, this is a great conversation and always happy to share information and also learn information as well too. Because as we said, this is always a evolving career and there's several of us. I say several, even though there needs to be a lot more of us out. Yep. But again, being able to share ideas amongst each other makes us better practitioners of our art. And again, that ultimately leads to future successes within the business and then also personally too, as far as like rewards in terms of short term, but also long term, as far as if you want stepping stones later on through your career progression. I can't think of one of few things where you actually literally are touching different areas of the business that can help you grow. If maybe some point in time you want to be a CTO or something like that, all these skill sets are really applicable, or again, you can just enjoy your day job like how we do. So it's right. Always a pleasure.
If anybody inspired by listening to your story, is that okay for them to reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Oh, definitely. I highly encourage it. Like I said, I'm always open to anybody, whether they be just starting out on the journey or maybe just some old vets that are just saying, hey, I need to bounce some ideas off you. You know, so like I'll be the same way too. I'm always happy to reach out and ask questions myself.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, MJ. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thanks, man.
Yes, I did appreciate it. Thanks.